Even the greatest of Greek philosophy has an inadequate understanding of human nature. You get this idea in Socrates that vice or evil is the result of ignorance, that you do bad things because you don't know. And if you knew, you wouldn't do them. So the cure is sort of enlightenment, and the idea is that if people were enlightened, they would not do bad stuff. Now we contrast this with Paul, which is the good that I would, I do not. The evil that I would not, that I do. So
I'm flawed. I'm
flawed, and
I can't do it alone.
And also that the evil is in the will. It's not that I don't know. I know.
Guys, this podcast is brought to you by MyBookie. I don't have time. I need to talk to you about this. I was going to get a studio and this camera and make it all like, shiny. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for that because college football is already up. So is the NFL. I don't know if you know this, but we are roaring through the season. And if you haven't placed a bet yet, you're missing out, and this is a problem. First of all, why am I wearing the seatbelt, okay? I'm feeling constrained, and this is too important, all right? At the end of the day, you want to bet college football? You know what's fun about college football? It's unpredictable. Things happen, okay? Blowouts, upsets, wild covers. MyBookie covers you for all of it. You can be ready before Sunday kickoff. If the NFL's your thing, which it is mine, that's a whole different subject, okay? A little more predictable, but it's still so much fun. MyBookie has got everything you need under one roof. And, oh, by the way, did I mention that they've got a casino with weekly blackjack pools? Yeah, MyBookie, okay? So if you haven't signed up yet, use code Callen, all right, Callen, and place any bet you choose. Up to $500 is fully covered. How about that? Fully covered. Make your play, and if it doesn't hit, you get it right back when you opt for using the Bet Back Bonus token. All right? The Bet Back Bonus token. You cannot lose with MyBookie, okay? It's where bettors win together, all right? Because bragging's good, but cashing is better, all right? Bragging is good, cashing out is better. And if that's not worth pulling my car over, taking my seatbelt off to talk to you about, I don't know what is. If you don't like sports and making money, maybe MyBookie isn't for you. Maybe it's not for you, but I know it's for me, okay? Because I love sports, because I'm an American. I love football, especially because I'm an American, all right? And I love money, because I'm an American, all right? And I love the juice. I love the excitement. So I look forward to Saturday, although college football, not as much. NFL is where it's at, because I'm a professional. And I'm sorry I'm getting all worked. I got to put my seatbelt on. I gotta get out of here. It's stuck, man. I'm yanking it too much. It's what happens when I start dealing with MyBookie. I get so excited. I want to go place a bet. Oh, I don't have to go anywhere. I can just place a bet on my phone. Sorry, got a little carried away. Back to the podcast. Dinesh, welcome.
Thank you.
Off Limits. I didn't get to finish it, but the dragon prophecy.
The dragons, plural.
The dragon's prophecy, which comes from Revelation.
Yes. The film is loosely based on a book of that title, written by this dude named Jonathan Cahn. And
who you interview in the...
Yeah, he's the guy.
He's a Jew who's actually but believes in Jesus, I believe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he doesn't. I don't think he objects to being called a Christian, but it's more that he wants to preserve his Jewish identity. I think he does the Sabbath.
He's more like Paul, sort of a religious Jew who just suddenly says, "Hey, the Messiah's here."
Exactly. That's it.
And all the other apostles. Yeah.
That's it. But yes, the dragon's prophecy refers to Revelation 12. So there's a depiction of a dragon, quite clearly representing the devil, going to war with a woman representing Israel. And the woman is pregnant, so...
And this is the vision that I think John had when he had his revelation.
Exactly. The revelation is to John. He's apparently on the island of Patmos, and he is recording these sort of phantasmagorial images and dreams, and a lot of that stuff is, there's quite obscure. So whenever you deal, as I do for the first time in my career, with the issue of biblical history and biblical prophecy, I'm very cautious about it because I believe that the book of Revelation is veiled quite deliberately. And so when I hear people very confidently do this exposition, this is going to happen 7 years later, this is going to happen, and I'm like, well, that's not all that clear. So I don't go there in this film. What I do is I look for, you could call it the really big prophetic signposts, and I put it out there, and I tell you what people are thinking about it, and I let you make up your own mind.
Yeah, well, you do a really good job. It's intense, man. I mean, there's the imagery. You're walking through where the festival, where the Nova Festival, where that disaster happened, that tragedy, and it must have been very moving to see. But what the film does, and I think very convincingly, is it seems to hearken to something that was already predicted in the Old Testament. And as somebody who's read the Old Testament twice, I've kind of read it 3 times because it's a lot. Getting through the books of Samuel and Judges and all that, but you also need a biblical scholar to help you through it, which I kind of read accompanying books to it. Gaza's mentioned at least 14, maybe 20 times. Home of the Philistines. Yes. So the film navigates a very wide territory, right? It begins, you're thrown in the middle of October 7th. And cinematically, I think it's very powerful because, first of all, it's live footage. Number 2, it's I'd never really seen all the footage until I saw the film. The government the government of Israel decided not to release it. Well, it's so hard to watch. It's hard to watch. That teenager that they made knock on that door, and then he's just a young guy like my nephew, like my son. Right. And they shot him. Right. And then what made all that so eerie was I'd been collecting this footage for 2 years, looking at a lot of it. Some of it was too much to put in the film, but that's what gave me the deja vu, being at the Gaza border, going to those kibbutzes, going to the Nova Festival sites. I had seen those places before, but only in Hamas footage. Mm-hmm. And so, in fact, one of the most eerie things for me is I was interviewing this woman, Lishai Miran. By the way, she's finally reunited with her husband, part of the hostage release. I looked that up, by the way. Yeah. I was hoping he was still alive. Yeah, he's still alive, and I've seen some video of him playing with those 2 little kids. It's so very moving. But as I was talking to Lishai about what's happening, she's like, oh, these Hamas monsters came through my window. I realized I've actually seen that footage. I actually have it. So normally in a documentary, someone will tell you, I was hiking in the woods, I fell off the cliff. They do a recreation. And you have to do a recreation, the only way to do it. But here, there is no recreation. You're actually on the scene, seeing what she's talking about. But then, just like you mentioned, the film pulls into a very wide look at the Bible, and Jonathan Kahn steps in, and he basically... Before you get into that, how did that come about? You're not necessarily a biblical scholar. No. You're not somebody who's thinking about this stuff. You're thinking more about America and what's going on with our country. And then all of a sudden, how did you make the connection between the Old Testament, the prophecies in the Old Testament, what it says in the Old Testament versus what's happening now? So my wife and I went to Israel at the end of 2022 for the first time, and we were exposed for the first time to biblical archaeology. Now, this is a topic that interested me immediately because I know that there are all these figures in the Bible, from Pontius Pilate, the high priest named Caiaphas, the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, going further back, King David. All Hebrews. Yeah, all Hebrews. And for thousands of years, really, they lived in the Bible, but only in the Bible. You couldn't find a non-biblical or historical attestation to these figures. And as a result, I remember even when I was at Dartmouth, going back to my younger days, I would listen to professors of biblical history. They'd read the Bible, and they would say, well, most of this looks to me in my armchair like it was written hundreds of years later. It looks to me like this was written by people who either embellished or made these people out of whole cloth.
And this was the prevailing, like, respectable, intelligent point of view until in the last few decades, biblical archaeology has been coming out of the ground,
like the City of David?
City of David being a big part of it.
You show that. Where literally, it's an underground city.
It's an underground city. That's right. Massive buildings, huge walls. But it's not. It's really going on, not even just in Israel. It's going on in Jordan. It's going on in Egypt. And what makes all this biblical archaeology so cool is that the Bible is validated not by the champions of the Bible, but by the enemies of the Bible. So, for example, David, who is King David and the house of David, a phrase that appears regularly in the Old Testament, as you know.
Where Jesus comes from.
Right. So in the north of Israel, out of the ground comes this stone inscription, and it is attributed to King Hazael of Syria, then called Aram. So this is where we get the root of the word Aramaic. Jesus spoke Aramaic. So King Hazael of Aram basically goes, I'm in a really good mood because I just won a victory against the house of David. This is the very first time scholars had seen the name House of David, obviously meaning there was a house of David, there was a lineage of David, and there was a David. Boom. Suddenly, an issue that had been open for 150 years is settled by a single rock.
But you know what bothers me about all of it, though, Dinesh, is that, and I want you to keep going, you know who doesn't dispute that Israel was the land of the Jews, that doesn't dispute the Old Testament? Muslims. The Quran does not say that the Old Testament is wrong. The Quran is just a continuation. It is a retelling in some ways of the story of Isaac and Abraham, but for the most part, the Jews, for the Muslims, were always the people of the book. They were always given their own little enclave for the most part, but keep going.
Well, this connects to where I'm going. So initially, I was interested in the archaeology because I said to myself, it authenticates the historicity of the Bible. And I've done some work in my earlier career writing about Christianity, debating some of the leading atheist people like Christopher Hitchens. So
Did you debate Hitch?
I debated Hitch 10 times.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
Why have I never seen that?
Oh, you know
That's
what?
That's a formidable adversary.
I will send you a link.
Dude, that's impressive.
Yeah, in fact, you'll love it because these are knocked down, drag out,
the man was good.
He was very good. Very good.
I don't fall in his camp, but he was good.
Oh no, for sure. And you'll see there's a lot of what's nice about it, and what I miss today is that spirit of fierce debate where it's like sling blades on both sides. We need more of it.
Yeah.
And there's very little of it.
Well, they killed the last guy who was great at it, Charlie Kirk, for God's sake.
This is true. Yeah. All right. So then, fast forward a year, and October 7th comes along. And now I'm looking at this October 7th footage, but I realized, and this was the insight that led to the film. This is before I met Jonathan Cahn. I realized that that October 7th and the war are connected to the biblical archaeology because the biblical archaeology, even though it's really about the Bible per se, it also addresses the political question of is this or is this not the ancestral homeland of the Jews? And it decisively answers that question. Yes, emphatically yes. And going back, by the way, very far.
I don't know how anybody disputes that. I mean, is this in dispute? I mean, I know what we're talking about here because the narrative was that the Israelis or the Jews, or the Ashkenazi Jews especially, were a colonial power because they were aligned with the British and ultimately the Americans. But to your point, if you want to get into homelands and who the indigenous people of a homeland, I'm perfectly willing to say it would belong to the Arabs were living there for millennia, but so were Jews, right?
Right,
Jerusalem was that country.
The Jewish claim is much stronger because, you mentioned Gaza being in the Bible. So the Philistines occupied the area largely overlapping with now the Gaza Strip. It was called Philistia.
That was new for me.
Yeah, Philistia.
Okay, I lived in the Middle East. I had never heard that. I should have. But yeah. Philistia, is that how they say it? Is that what Palestinian?
Yes, it's the same word because it's Philistine in Arabic.
Philistia, yeah.
Yeah, so it's Palestine, Philistine, same word. It's the same word.
Wow,
so,
isn't that but dude, I don't know how I missed this. Like, it's so interesting.
It's so interesting, right? And I'll tell you another interesting thing.
But nobody reads the Old Testament.
If you don't know this, it'll totally blow your mind. But so the Philistines, they had 5 cities. They had Ashdod, they had Ashkelon, but Gaza was their main city. In fact, in the famous story of Samson, Samson is dragged, the Bible says, to Gaza.
He's taken as hostage.
He's taken as a hostage. Now, this is how the Philistines became Palestine. In the first couple of centuries after Christ, the Jews had been doing these Jewish revolts. The Jewish revolts go back to about 150 BC, continue to about 150 AD. The Romans have had it. So the Romans go, not only are we going to smash these people, and not are we going to destroy their temple, we're going to change their name. So they took the name, they said, no more Israel, no more Judea. We're going to take the name of their enemies, the Philistines, and we're going to rename this land Palestine. Wow. That's how we got Palestine. And then you fast forward almost 2,000 years, an Egyptian Arab, right, think about this, named Yasser Arafat, basically goes, I'll take that name, I'll become a Palestinian. And so the Palestinians are an invented identity. There was never a country or a nation called Palestine.
No, but it's important to at least acknowledge that there were what was called the Arabs of the Levant.
Right.
Right. And so there were a lot of Bedouin tribes, a lot of Arab tribes, and they were tribal, that lived in that region, many of whom were subsistence farmers, many of whom were Bedou. So they lived off their sheep. If you just look at a map of that part of the world, it's not rich in resources, and it's definitely not rich in water. There were little pockets where there were oases, but to survive there, and I've spent time. I know a lot of Palestinians. I know a lot of Jordanians. I've been to Jordan twice. The area is arid, and so you survive off your livestock, your horses, your sheep, your goats, that's just the truth. And you've got to find grazing land, camels, and water. But water is very scarce.
Yes, but the point I'm making is this, and that is that the fact that you have tribal people in a land, like take India, for example. You have in India various groups, ethnic groups and religious groups. Take the Sikhs. The Sikhs are the guys with the turbans. They're a religious minority. They live in India. But that doesn't automatically give them a right to their own country. They don't talk about the 2-state solution. Let's partition India and give it. Now, interestingly, India was partitioned by the British, and that's how we got Pakistan, and that's how we got India. But the point I'm getting at is that you could very well have Israel, being a Jewish state, with some Arabs living in it, who participate in the society, who vote.
You do.
Which you do now.
Yeah, 20% of the Knesset.
Yeah, and you've got Arabs in the Knesset, you've got Arabs who live in Jerusalem, and so on. But coming back to the film, what Jonathan Cahn does, and this surprised me when I discovered it, and I thought it was very ingenious. He goes, all the stuff we're seeing in the aftermath of October 7th, the war between Israel and Hamas, he goes, that's a replay of ancient battles recorded in the Bible 3,000 years ago between the Israelites and the Philistines. Now, initially I thought this guy's getting a lot of mileage out of the fact that the
By the way, me too.
Yeah.
When he started saying this in the film, I'm like, I literally was like this. Here we go.
Here we go.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's
now you're getting that's like numerology. All right.
Exactly.
But then you're like, dude, this guy makes a crazy case.
Right.
Right. I was like, this shit is prophesized. Like the only person that's going to solve this problem, this conflict, is a guy named God. Like that's literally what I found myself saying.
Yeah, because what he does is he pays attention to biblical detail and he pays attention to contemporary detail, and then he starts matching them up. And again,
and he's not doing a lot of interpretation with the Old Testament.
No,
you know what I mean?
Right.
He's not adding things to it. It's like this is. If you look at this was done this way. It's crazy, but keep going.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned Samson, so just to draw out his analogy, this is Jonathan Cahn. He goes, what happened to Samson? First of all, he's captured by the Philistines. Then what happens to him? He's blinded.
They gouge out his eyes.
Right, and so in a sense, you could say Israel was blinded on October 7th.
Well, by the way, dilate on that, because what they did with the help of the Iranians, apparently, was the drones took out all their surveillance cameras. They knew exactly where they were, and you can see it actually. I think there's footage of it.
There's footage of them hitting these communications towers and blinding in a technological sense. Samson is dragged to Gaza, a familiar name, and then it says the people of Gaza wanted Samson to be stripped of his clothes and brought out, quote, so he can entertain us.
He could amuse them.
Yeah, he can amuse us. And then fast forward to October 7th and the aftermath. Captives are stripped to the waist. They're paraded. And there are the Gazans celebrating Allahu Akbar. And then Khan, of course, in a very wry note, he goes, well, I guess we could say that Samson was the first hostage of Gaza. And I'd never heard this kind of analysis before. And so the way I was thinking was, I'm like, listen, I have the biblical archaeology. That's the ancient past. Then I've got the present, which is all this great footage, interesting footage of the war, very cinematic. And then here's Jonathan Cahn introducing this element of biblical prophecy, but he's not doing it in a wacky way. He's doing it in a sophisticated way. So if I can integrate these things into a tapestry, I've got a really good movie.
Yeah. Well done, because that's what you did. And it's really hard as I get older, and I've spent a lot of time studying the Old and New Testament. I'm a layman, but at least I've read through it. I've slogged through it. And then I've read the accompanying sort of guidance. I've listened to rabbis break it down. I've listened to the priests break it down, and then biblical scholars. It's very difficult to not think, maybe at least whether you're an atheist or not, that this has been prophesized. Let's take the Hebrews in general. God, at the end of the Old Testament, essentially turns his back on the Israelites. He gets rid of half the tribes. We never find out what happened to them. He was so mad at them that they all kind of just disappeared. The Jews, the Hebrews, argued with God. They were constantly making him nuts. Moses would be like, let me talk to them, please. God, Father, give me this. It was literally like, I apologize on behalf of my people. Let me go talk to them before you open the earth and swallow them whole.
I got to tell you something funny in this context. I got to credit Zev Ornstein of the City of David, who's in the film. He goes, Dinesh, if you start reading the sacred literature of other cultures, it's extremely triumphalist. Their leaders are the greatest. They win every war. God is on their side. No defeats are even recorded. No attention is paid to any time the pharaohs lose a war, for example. He goes, with the Bible, he goes, and the Old Testament specifically, he says, if you take God out of it, it looks like it's written by a bunch of anti-Semites.
Dude, 100%. I said that to a rabbi. Yeah. I was at the airport, and I said, I'm reading the Old Testament. I said, I got to tell you, your leaders, Saul, right? With 700
Even
wives.
Abraham.
I mean, Abraham was Abraham's going to kill his own son. He's having sex with his wife, is barren, so he's having sex with basically the maid.
Then he passes his wife off as a sister.
Then he kicks her out of there. He kicks the 13-year-old, and he's like, hey, get out of here. My wife just got pregnant. Like, go to the desert. She's dying of thirst. An angel comes. David, the house of David, the king of the Jews, took his best general, impregnates Bathsheba, who he just thought was hot because he saw her bathing on a roof. Right. Now he's like, oh man, I just impregnated the wife of my best general, and sends the general on a suicide mission. That's when I think Samuel comes to him and says, you have to repent, blah, blah, blah. The point is, I said to this rabbi, I go, I wouldn't want to hang out with the ancient Israelites, especially the ones from Deuteronomy that were downright just almost genocidal, because that's what God told him. And he said, they were human beings. Our patriarchs were all too human. Jacob, who cheated his brother Esau out of his inheritance by dressing in wolf's clothing because Isaac was blind. Like, what are we talking about here? Right? But that's the strength of the strength of the stories in the Old Testament are that there are no sacred cows. None, including the patriarchs. It's only God, and that's that God that you can't look on, that you can never really measure. And the other thing I think is amazing, again in the Bible, is that God says, I'm going to scatter you through the earth, and you're going to be persecuted. And if you look at all the ancient peoples, whether the Assyrians, there are some, shout out to Patrick Bet-David and my friend Vinny, but for the most part, the Assyrians, the Babylonians become the Iraqis, but for the most part, the Hittites and the Alamites, they all disappear. And the only people that survive are this tiny band of quote unquote stiff-necked people who God was mad at, who are scattered throughout the earth, and the only thing they had, they spoke different languages, different countries, they had the Torah. They had two things that kept them together: persecution, everybody hated them, and the Torah. And as a result, they were always on the outside looking in. They had to be innovative. But what's amazing is they stayed a people for 2,500 years until 1948.
You know, and to me, prophecy is impressive in direct proportion to its implausibility, right?
Because that's a great statement.
Yeah. So what happens is, if you were to say, and forget about like in 1400 AD that the Jews were going to come back, this would be ridiculous. But it would be ridiculous even in the 1970s. Like when I came to America in the late 1970s as a teenager, the Shah was in charge in Iran. Iran was pro-Israel. And so the idea that you would have a constellation of forces that would mobilize against Israel, this took the Khomeini revolution that was right around the corner and came in 1979. But the return of the Jews to their ancient homeland, the revival of the Hebrew language, the fact that Israel is, you know, I've been a lot of places in the world. The world is becoming much more homogenous, right? Brussels is a lot like Zurich, which is a lot like Copenhagen these days. But Israel is recognizably still the land of the Bible. And that in itself is a kind of miracle.
Well, also the Old Testament, people should know, is a story of the Jews being essentially turning their back on God. The priest said, "Eat a big purple grape." It starts with the Egyptians. They're kicked out of Egypt, essentially. The Pharaoh pursues them, but they escape. They're in the desert. So it's eat Egypt. Then the Assyrians, then they kind of like, they get to Jerusalem, they get to the promised land, and now they're prospering, but they turn their back on God. God sends a prophet. They're like, kiss my ass. And he sends the Assyrians to punish them. The Assyrians raise the temple, bring them back to Assyria. And then, please, we're really sorry. About 70 years later, they're allowed to go back somehow. A miracle happens. The Babylonians then, they mess up again. They turn their back on God. The Babylonians come. They take them hostage. So eat a big purple, and then the Persians come. And then the Greeks come. So it's a story of constantly the temple being raised. Finally, I think when the Greeks do it, the temple is raised and it never comes back until this day. And now in 1948, after the Holocaust, they finally come back to the homeland. But if you read the Old Testament, which is the Abrahamic God, it's where Christianity, it is where Islam comes from. That is the God that Muslims and Christians pray to ultimately.
This
right?
is true.
Absolutely. But what's interesting is that they were always being exiled from the promised land and then being brought back. And I guess 1948, you can understand how Jews, I'm not Jewish, but you can understand how Jews and their lineage, kind of, there's a supernatural, whether you're even an observing Jew, there's a supernatural glue or a story that keeps revealing itself. It's not just the Bible, it reveals itself. It seems to be playing out, and it's very hard to escape that fact, regardless of, I don't know how you would explain it. But this supernatural idea seems to have kept them a people against all odds.
I think that's true. And I also would take it further. The reason that in this film I went there is because I kept realizing the insufficiency of what you could call the natural explanation. So take October 7th. I don't know of any case in history where you have this kind of a homicidal attack that is recorded not by the victims, but by the attackers, who subsequently broadcast it and are extremely proud of it. Even the Nazis, as you know, didn't do that.
No.
Right. So that right away tells you that there's a level of evil here that needs to be considered. And the event itself stands out in its uniqueness. I mean, I'm aware, as a sort of an aficionado of some of these crime stories, that there are serial killers who do this. They record their victims, they obsess over the footage, they consider it a trophy. Well, essentially, that's what October 7 was. It was a mass serial killer event. The second thing that's interesting to me is anti-Semitism. Now, in my earlier career, I wrote a book called The End of Racism years ago, about 30 years ago. And in that book, I tried to contrast racism and anti-Semitism. And I said, well, racism is you're up here and you're looking down on someone. And you're saying they're inferior, you're no good, I'm better than you. Anti-Semitism, I said, is complex because the Jew as a group is doing really well. So anti-Semitism is looking up at somebody with an envious glance. And it's kind of like saying, look.
That is a very interesting distinction.
Yeah, it's like, hey, listen, you're doing better than me, but not because you're smarter, not because you work harder, not because you're more organized, not because you value education.
You're more cunning, sneakier.
You're more cunning, you're sneakier.
You're evil.
My group will not stoop to the low tactics that your group has used. So, all right, so it's all that. And I said, but even after I've done that, and I think it's pretty clever, I feel like I haven't really still gotten a full hold of it, right? And it's almost like you need a supernatural explanation, because I've been doing a lot of podcasts with secular Jews in Israel these days. And I tell them, and they're a little shocked. I go, I don't think you understand anti-Semitism. And they're like, why not? And I go, that's because you're secular. And so to you, you are searching for a natural explanation of a phenomenon that does require a supernatural explanation in addition to the natural one. So you keep saying, like, I don't get why us? Like, why do they hate us? And I go, but when you put in the supernatural explanation, now you have a more rounded picture. And the supernatural explanation, which, by the way, goes something like this: the devil is in a constant battle with God. And if you don't want to personify the devil, good and evil are in a constant battle. Now, interestingly, evil is a little parasitic on good. The devil cannot overthrow God. So what the devil does is he picks on the things that are important to God. And so why does the devil pick on Adam and Eve in Genesis? Not Adam and Eve haven't done anything to the devil. But the idea here is that if Adam and Eve are God's cherished creation,
innocence.
I'm going to ruin them and get revenge on God. So the devil picks on the Jews for the same reason. If the Jews are the chosen people, the devil goes, all right, I'm going to throw them out of their native homeland, from the river to the sea. I'm going to go to their most sacred place, which is the Solomonic Temple. I'm going to put an Islamic victory arch on top of that, called the Dome of the Rock, attach it to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So,
by the way, we should just for a second talk about that. I've been there. That's a fascinating detail. When you think about, the Israelis are in charge of Jerusalem for better, for whatever you want to say it, and it is in Israel. But the Dome of the Rock, where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is, which is a spectacular mosque, that is where the Jewish temple, the original Jewish temple, was supposed to have been. Now, the significance of that, it was built because that is where Abraham was told by God to sacrifice his first son, Isaac.
Exactly.
Now, in the Quran, it says that was where Abraham was told to sacrifice his first son, Ishmael.
That's right.
Not his second son, Isaac. But you see, the Old Testament comes first. So I tend to go, hey, guys, you guys came along 700 years later.
Somebody made a little edit.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's a little bit of an edit, bro. This is taking it from the Old Testament. We got to give, they kind of wrote it first. So I got to give it to them.
But either way, you're saying this is...
Well, that's a fascinating detail.
Yeah, it is.
If you were an observant Jew and that's your history, and the Ottomans come along. And remember, by the way, everybody, the Arabs of the Levant, I always liken a little bit to the Native Americans. They were always under occupation. The Arabs of the Levant were under Ottoman rule for hundreds of years.
Yep.
Then the French, British, and ultimately, the European Jews, I guess. But for the most part, that's a fascinating detail, isn't it? That the Al-Aqsa Mosque is over the holiest site in Judaism, and as a Jew, you're not allowed to go there.
Yeah, and the holiest site in Christianity also. Yeah. Because think about it, when Jesus walked the pilgrimage road to the temple, he bathed in the pool of Siloam. When his parents lost him, Mary and Joseph, at the age of 12. And this is the beauty of standing on that pilgrimage road on the ruins. And we used AI to recreate it, with the loaves and people with the coins.
It's great.
But now you can totally understand. I mean, for me, the Bible comes to life in that I can now see how the parents lost their kid, and they're like, where's Yeshua? Where'd he go? And then they see him, he's in the temple. Wow.
I'm in my father's house.
That's right. So now, interestingly, for Muslims, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is only the third holiest site in Islam, because the mosque in Mecca and Medina is number 1 and number 2. And
That's a very good point.
But they jealously guard that. And even when Israel...
Well, the second Intifada really was sparked when Ariel Sharon essentially marched through with his security detail the Al-Aqsa Mosque grounds.
Yes, and not to mention Hamas referred to it in the October 7th attacks.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they specifically said that this is partly in protection and retaliation.
See, I have so little time for anybody who somehow calls Hamas freedom fighters. Yeah, I find it there is an absolute case to be made if you feel that Israel's response was disproportionate, when you want to be appalled by the amount of civilian deaths. That just makes you a human being. I will never, ever, I tend to stay quiet on this because I'm never going to criticize somebody for whose heart breaks when all those Palestinian civilians are treated, are killed and orphaned and all that. I'm not saying that, but there is something inherently hypocritical and outrageous at the fact that people call Hamas freedom fighters when the second that ceasefire happened and the Israelis pulled out, Hamas did what? They took, quote unquote, Israeli collaborators, an entire family, by the way, a whole clan, and shot them in the head on the street, and did way worse. Nobody mentions that. Nobody mentions how many Palestinians Hamas has killed. Living under Hamas is exactly like living under a mafia regime, but the difference between the Italian mafia is they wouldn't kill your whole family, and Hamas did, okay? And they're doing it right now. So I'd like to know where Mark Ruffalo and all those Hollywood people who are outraged at I never criticized you for that, but can you say a couple things about what Hamas is doing now? Can you say something? It's just crickets, man.
And they won't. And by the way, we're also dealing now with a faction right of center that's in the exact same position. These are people who basically said Israel is the root of the problem. Netanyahu is the evil man in this whole scheme.
Yeah, well, there's that Tucker Carlson camp.
Yeah, the Tucker Carlson camp, but it includes Bannon, it includes Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of young guys who are sort of the shock troops of this faction. It's not the majority of the Republican Party. It's certainly not Trump's approach. I don't think it's going to take over the Republican Party or the right, but it is a very noisy faction on social media.
Yeah, well, there has always been this hush-hush conversation about how strong AIPAC is, how strong the Jewish lobby is, how strong Israel is in how it, and Jewish money, and how it controls our politics. I've always looked at it as the following. Look, when you were a Jew, in this country, you knew that there was one place you could go if the shit hit the fan. There used to be nowhere to go. And if you see at the end of Schindler's List, where all the Jews are sitting there, a lot of them, people don't realize, had to stay in those concentration camps. People don't know that. They had to stay in the concentration camps for almost 3 years after the Holocaust because they couldn't go that way, that way, that way, or that way. There wasn't in Israel. So these were true refugees and wretches from World War II. A lot of them had numbers on their wrists. And I always marvel at what happened because this tiny group of people said, hey, if we don't figure this situation out, we are such a minority. There were more Jews in New York than there were in Israel up until very recently.
Right.
Now think about this.
Right.
I think there were like 9 million. It's some tiny group of people. And the Promised Land had no resources. You get some minerals from the Dead Sea. Good luck with that shit. So what they did have was their imagination and their minds. And they said, we better figure out a way to control the narrative. We better figure out, they were already an intellectual group of people and a very innovative people. But if we don't somehow figure out a way to control this narrative, because the House of Saud, everybody, and the UAE had way more money than the Jews. You want to talk about money, there's money, and then there's the House of Saud. But they never bought CNN. They didn't buy that. They have Al Jazeera, but they didn't do that. And it's very interesting to me that you see the Israelis who kind of said, we better figure out a way to become a nuclear power. We need an army. We better have an intelligence agency that strikes fear into everybody's hearts, because if we don't, we die. And I always look at it that way. As somebody, again, I lived in the Middle East for 8 years of my life. I love the Arabs. I grew up around the Arabs. All my experience around the Arabs, Palestinians, Saudi Arabians, Lebanese, Jordanians, all my experiences are positive. I lived in the Muslim world. I was around them. I lived in India, but mainly I remember I was in Pakistan. I was around. All my experiences are positive around Muslims and Arabs.
Yeah,
but
they're
having
big,
said that,
yep.
I'm just saying that you have to give. Don't be mad at the Jews for being such good fighters, for being so good at survival, for being so innovative. Like, I always say this, like if you like Hollywood, it was invented by 4 Jewish refugees. If you like an MRI machine, it was invented by a Jew. If you like fake breasts, guess who invented that procedure? A Jewish doctor. So your wife may not be Jewish, but her tits are, everybody. You know what I'm saying? It's like my joke, but I mean, we can keep going.
Yeah.
So, you know, but a really interesting distinction you make. Racism is always looking down, isn't it? And this is more looking up and saying, I don't know how you guys do that, but you got to be cheating.
Well, the interesting thing to me is that I now make a case for Israel that is threefold. It has 3 tiers to it. It has the political and the strategic, and then it has the cultural or civilizational, and then it has the biblical. So the lower tier, the strategic, is what you're talking about. And that is this. Israel is very good at fighting radical Islam, and the United States is not. Look at the record of the U.S. First of all, Jimmy Carter pulls the Persian rug out from the Shah, and guess what? We get Khomeini. So we help radical Islam get a hold of a major state. Number 2, we go to Afghanistan after 9/11, pulverize the Taliban, but they're back. So they win in the end. And then Iraq, we all know what happened to that. So our record is checkered at best, D+. Look at Israel. Those guys live in a bad neighborhood. They understand the situation on the ground. They're like some guy who lives, on like the 4th Ward in Houston. That guy is looking over his shoulder. He's situationally aware. He's very lean and tough because he's on the edge of survival. So the Israelis are good at that stuff. And they can fight radical Islam simultaneously in Sudan, in Yemen, in Gaza, in the West Bank, and in Iran, all at the same time.
Part of it's also they have their intelligence operatives are Arabic. They speak fluent, they're Arab Jews, so they speak fluent Arabic in that dialogue.
That's right.
Right? So you've got a lot of that too. So formidable.
And then let's go to the sort of second tier, and that is the fact that Western society, Western civilization is based on Athens and Jerusalem. Athens referring, of course, to classical reason, Socrates, philosophy. Free speech, philosophy, the Greek theater, Pericles, democracy. Okay, we get all that. But Jerusalem is
the land of faith.
The 10 Commandments, Genesis and the idea that our rights come from God, the Exodus and the power of that, Job and the idea of suffering, the Psalms, the Hebrew prophets. So
also important to mention that the Christian faith, at least, found its roots when Rome was bursting at the seams with Greek philosophy. Somehow it wasn't enough. Somehow you needed more.
That's right. No, this is an excellent point. That Athens, I don't think, can sustain the West without Jerusalem. Because when people think about the Greeks, they don't remember that Greek society was drenched in, first of all, it was incessantly at war.
Yeah.
It was, it was an aristocratic caste society, mass slavery, all kinds of barbarism. The Spartans the unwanted child is left on the hillside to be found dead in the morning.
That's right. God forbid you're weak or deformed.
That's right. That's right. And also, I think a very sort of inadequate even the greatest of Greek philosophy has an inadequate understanding of human nature. Let me just mention this. So you get this idea in Socrates that vice or evil is the result of ignorance, that you do bad things because you don't know. And if you knew, you wouldn't do them. So the cure is sort of enlightenment, and the idea is that if people were enlightened, they would not do bad stuff. Now we contrast this with Paul, which is the good that I would, I do not. The evil that I would not, that I do. So
I'm flawed. I'm flawed.
And
I can't do it alone.
And also that the evil is in the will. It's not that I don't know. I know.
Well, and to piggyback on that, remember the Greeks were religious, but they had gods, and those gods were actually not that interested in human affairs. They would dabble. The gods were jealous. They might come down and impregnate your wife. Might be a bull. There's a lot of things they would do. You never knew what they were going to do. They might just be jealous and kill you. They might just have sex with you. They might have sex with your wife. It was always sort of up to you as a Greek person to kind of like have this tenuous relationship with different gods. They might screw you over. They might not. But there's nothing to rely on. There certainly wasn't this overarching rule set. It was really might makes right. The Romans too. It was power. The warrior with the largest stick was really the ultimate ruler. The breastplate and everything else, very different from the Jews.
Yeah, and very different also from the idea. I mean, you look at the writers of the gospel; they're like nobodies. The Jesus's followers are fishermen.
Yeah, and it's a radical idea too, right? Love your enemy, turn the other cheek, the meek will inherit the earth. All these anti-Roman, really anti sort of male impulse caveman things, right?
Right.
You hit me, I'm going to hit you back. You hurt my family, I'm going to kill your village. We've never evolved from that, by the way. My default is murder. My joke when I do stand-up is when I talk about making the world a better place, that means some people need to die, right?
Right.
But for the most part, it's almost this Buddhist idea of you may be able to cut me into 1,000 pieces, but I can be the one cut into 1,000 pieces without batting an eye.
Absolutely. And some of the great atheists like Nietzsche condemn Christianity for this because they think Christianity has made Western culture weak by emasculating it in this way. But what you can't doubt is that Jesus just introduces this new ethic into the world that's just not there before. But coming back to our topic, the third area of sort of defense of Israel, and this is the part I'm most active on right now in social media, is this rather bizarre effort to detach the New Testament from the Old in the name of something called replacement theology. I don't know if you've heard about this.
No, please tell me.
So the basic idea is this. The basic idea is that all this stuff about God giving the land to Abraham was apparently, even though the Bible says the opposite, conditional. It was based upon the Jews behaving themselves. And the idea of replacement theology is the Jews did not behave themselves. So along comes the Messiah Jesus. The Jews kill him. And so Jesus inaugurates a new era reflected in the New Testament, and essentially all the Old Testament stuff is now obsolete and can be disposed of, and God's promises are revoked.
By the way, we're getting back to your film here.
That's right. This is all.
Okay. By the way, stay with us because Dinesh is bringing us back to the whole point of the film.
Yeah,
and the dragon's prophecy.
Right. So the film shows not just the political roots of the Jews in that land, but what it also shows is the deep connection between the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures, and the fact that Christianity is not something new, it is something engrafted onto an existing tree. That this actual imagery is used in the book of Acts to describe the Christians. And, this is not in the film, but it pertains to it. Very early on in the book of Acts, it turns out Paul, a Jew, is preaching to the Gentiles. The other apostles are all preaching to Jews about the Messiah. And Paul's basically bringing all these new people in, and the apostles are a little indignant because they basically say to Paul, listen, come on, these people all need to become Jews because they need to become Jews and then they need to accept the Messiah kind of like us. And so there's a bit of a showdown between Paul and the apostles, and Paul kind of comes out ahead, but they do agree. And what they agree is this, that the Gentiles don't have to be circumcised, they don't have to keep
Kosher.
Sabbath or kosher.
Yeah, the book of
you don't have to
Leviticus,
follow
you
some of
can
the
throw that away,
some
yeah.
of the rituals can be put aside, but you have to keep everything else. So there's no sense that somehow you can repudiate, God's creation or the Exodus or Moses or the Ten Commandments. All that stays. And this is the mainstream of Christianity now for 2,000 years. So to me, at least this version of replacement theology is very problematic, even from a theological perspective.
But it's also biblical. In other words, in the book, what I got from your film was that in the Bible, the Old Testament, essentially, when the world is against Israel, when the world turns against Israel. So for the first time in my lifetime, I'm 58, I am hearing mainstream criticism, not just of Israel, but mainstream criticism of Jewish culture, Israel as a nation state. I never used to hear this, but you're hearing it, of course, from the left, but you're also hearing it, to your point, from a substantial number of people on the right. And it's very interesting because the Old Testament prophesies that, and the whole world after this Gaza thing, the whole world has turned against Israel. This has been a terrible, as Netanyahu said, we've been losing the public relations war for 2,500 years, but this is real. Like I don't know of a country besides the United States and just the half of the United States that's actually in Israel's corner here. They've really isolated themselves. But ain't that what the Old Testament said? And they said this is what's going to happen before the end of time.
Well, Jonathan Cahn in this film says the following. He goes, look, one of the signs of the end times is the Jews will come back. That happened in 48. So that's check. That's done. He goes, the other sign is there will be a rising temperature of attacks coming worldwide against the Jews as the people of God, but also against the spiritual Israelites. This is his term, which is against the Christians. And he says you will be seeing physical violence against both groups, but not only that, you will see widespread, cultural degradation and condemnation. So in other words, you see, for example, even in the secular West, a lot of just open hostility to Jews and Christians, open hostility to Israel and the principles of the United States and the West. And so, in a way, you have this biblical exposition, but then you and I can say, even with our relatively secular minds, we say, all right, let's look around the world and see if these things are evident, and they sure are, aren't they?
It's fascinating, man. It really is. It's hard to avoid. And then you've got this sort of whole social media thing and AI gone bad. I had a scientist on, Nate Soros, a computer scientist, about this, and there are credible computer scientists, not a few of them, who think that general artificial intelligence could be literally like a god, but not a benevolent one. A
right.
God that will not respect its biological architects because it doesn't have to, because it doesn't even notice them.
And wouldn't that be a
wouldn't that be right in line with John's prophecy?
Well, wouldn't that be right in line with the Garden of Eden, right? Because it's kind of like, this is the way I read the Garden of Eden. God says to man, okay, listen, you're happy in Eden. Why are you happy? Because you're with your Creator. I made you. You're living according to my plan. But listen, if you want to keep my plan, don't eat from this tree. I don't have to give you a reason, because if I gave you a reason, then that would be why you wouldn't eat. But I want you not to eat because I told you so. Because I want you to choose between living by my plan or you'd rather live by your own plan, right? And basically, the message I take from Genesis is that Adam and Eve decided, well, no, we'd rather go with our own plan. And in a sense, God goes, well, then you can't live here. I'm going to give you a world, but it's going to be a world of laws, physical laws. And so you're going to be at the mercy of those laws. And you also will have free will, which means you're going to be at the mercy of each other. And that's the world we live in now. So what you're saying is that AI essentially is going to do to us what we did to our creator.
It's just like
interesting, right?
It's so interesting, but it feels true. Like if you could tell me that we're not heading in that direction, I'm all ears. But everything I see is basically pointing to that.
Well, and the other thing about it is that Adam and Eve were drawn into the temptation by its apparent short-term benefits, right? Because it's like, look, the apple looks really good. I mean, I've eaten it.
You'll get the tree of knowledge, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I got all the knowledge I need on this phone, but it doesn't get me closer to the truth.
Right.
I was thinking about that. Everything's at my fingertips with ChatGPT. I can get all the facts I want. It doesn't actually get me closer to meaning, truth. It really just doesn't, man.
Not only that, but I would go further than that. Did you ever see the guy who made the observation? He was some sort of a business guy, and he goes, whenever I read the business press and they're talking about my industry, he goes, I notice that they get a lot of things wrong. They just don't have that on-the-ground knowledge that somebody who's in the field does, and so it's like all botched. But he goes, but the funny thing about it is, he goes, I assume that this very same media on every other subject gets it right.
Right. So do I.
Right. So do we all.
But you don't.
But you can be fairly sure that they don't. And what does AI do? AI synthesizes this existing vast body of, let's call it, at best partially true information, and it delivers it right back to you with an oracular certitude. Yeah. And we're all supposed to salute and go, yep. That's the way it is.
Yeah.
Even though that's actually not the way it is.
The only thing I'm thinking about now is, I'm optimistic that I think what Trump did in Gaza with the Israelis is historic.
Yep.
I did this thing for a bunch of Marines for their 250th birthday, and I was like, you got to give a shout out. Whatever you think of Trump, you got to give him credit for bringing peace to a region that hasn't had peace since Moses had a parting of the ways with the Pharaoh. I mean, that's significant. The Abraham Accords are no small measure, man.
And he's done it twice. Abraham Accords and now the peace plan.
It's incredible.
And you and I'm old enough to have heard, I wasn't
here. Are we the same age?
I'm 64.
Okay, so you're a little older.
A little older. But I came to
Got
America.
All your hair. What the hell?
Well, when I came to America, of course, I was familiar with the Nixon plan. Then there was the Carter plan. Then the Clinton plan. So even really in my adult lifetime, there have been lots of presidents who have gone with some fix-it plan to the Middle East, and most of them have come away empty-handed. So here goes Trump in his brash real estate mogul / mafia boss style, and he goes in there and he pulls off what I think the left is a little bit in awe of him right now, because they didn't think he could do it.
Yeah. Well, there's the old saying that with most presidents, they say, let's negotiate or I'm going to bomb you. Let's negotiate or I'm going to bomb you. And Trump goes, I'm going to bomb you. You want to negotiate? Kind of a
good way to put it.
But it really is, it works. Like that guy is like, I will unleash a hell on you that you've never seen. So you better come to the table. I genuinely believe, like people can say, this, all his flaws, personality flaws. I genuinely believe that guy's anti-war. He's the only president I've ever seen who really puts his money where his mouth is. And in terms of like Israel controlling the United States, which you hear all the time, the United States puts checks on Israel all the time. Yeah,
and not the other way around. In other words,
people don't realize that.
I on the face of it, right? You have a country of like 10 to 12 million. The U.S. has a vastly bigger GDP. We have all the advanced weaponry. So for Israel to control America is akin to saying that a 5-year-old is controlling a college senior. In theory, it's possible. Maybe the 5-year-old.
Yes, but you got to understand, with every conspiracy theory, there's always an invisible circle of Jews holding the strings.
Yeah, that's right.
With shekels.
That's right.
Even Trump is a big orange puppet.
Yeah, that's right. Right. And people
but that'll
say
never change.
It'll never change, and people don't give up on it, right? In other words, I have
and
this
it's been that way since the beginning of time.
I had this conversation, and the guy, first of all, they try to show that I'm a Jew. And this requires incredible pyrotechnics, right? So this woman goes, well, he's a Jew because when the Jews were thrown out of Portugal in the 15th century, some of them went to Goa in India. And I'm like, well, that's interesting and ingenious, but it really won't work because I don't have any Portuguese heritage.
Yeah.
My ancestors converted and they took a Portuguese name, but I'm 100% Indian. I have my ancestry in me to prove it. Yeah. So that falls flat. But then they go, well, you're getting $7,000. And I go, actually, my wife and I have given hundreds of thousands of dollars to biblical archaeology in Jerusalem. So I'm like, I'm not on Israel's payroll. They're like on mine, you know. But again, these people genuinely think that you can be bought for, as you say, a few shekels. Makes no sense.
Yeah, you're called a shill and stuff. I just believe in. I try to really not get in. I'm not getting involved in. I very rarely talk about the Israeli-Palestinian thing. It's just there ain't no way to win it, no matter where you choose, where you stand. It's just all insane. But I just wish people were consistent. I think you have to be consistent in life. And if you're going to criticize, again, it's like. When people want to criticize what Netanyahu's regime has done in Gaza, you're welcome to do that, and there's plenty to criticize. Fine. But guess what? There are plenty of Israeli Jews that share your criticism.
That's true.
And the strength of Israel is this, and this is the irony of Israel. When Trump went to speak at the Knesset, when Netanyahu and Trump showed up, Trump was cheered, Netanyahu was booed.
So I saw that.
If you think there are a lot of people that like Netanyahu in Israel, that like the hardliners in Israel, you're sorely mistaken. And the strength of Israel has always been that, when I was there, they said, if you have two Israelis in a room, you have three opinions. Right? They're always arguing. They always say if Israel didn't have the Arabs to fight, they'd be in a civil war because they've always been fighting with each other.
Well, you see this in Jesus' own time.
Of course you do.
There were like all these different schools,
Sadducees,
all these purported messiahs, all these theological disputations.
Yes, always.
So this is why,
But that's debate, isn't it?
It is.
Under the authority of no one. Upon further evidence, there's a scientific approach to life and getting to the truth. And just because you appear as a God, I'm not even going to believe that you walked on water. I don't care. That is inherent to the Jewish character. The idea that I just have to see it for myself, and I'm going to have a different opinion, and I'm going to voice that opinion.
Right.
And that is a very important concept, right? You don't have a monolithic way of thinking in Israel. There are a lot. Now, here is what unifies the Israelis: any existential threat. Anytime somebody says you don't deserve to be here, you'll get everybody in the Likud and everybody in the Labor Party. You'll get the entire Knesset to just band together because all threats are existential to Israelis and to the Jews, all of them.
That was brought physically close to me when I was standing in those kibbutzes, because when I asked the Jews living in those kibbutzes, like, where's Gaza?
And by the way, you heard boom in the background.
Yeah, and they're like right over there. It's like one football field away.
Literally, when you asked, you heard a huge explosion.
That's right. Yeah. And machine gun fire in the background.
And for that woman who had her husband kidnapped and her neighbor slaughtered, like, when you asked her that question and she was telling you that, you said something like, what is it like to hear that? And all of a sudden you hear boom, boom, when you went like that.
Right.
Like that with the machine gun fire. And she lived it and she was hearing it still. Like,
yeah.
Dude.
And she just said something like, this is our life, which shows you that what living on the edge of survival must be like. Well, one of the things I like to do cinematically is, I think that, number one, we're living in a very visual culture, so people need to see it. That's the reason for having the October 7 footage and fairly riveting and kind of graphic vividness. because I think that one of the problems that we often have is we know about things, but we don't have an experiential sense of them. So if I were to say to you,
this is exactly why, to just to dilate on this, being consistent, and I always say this for the left and the right who have criticism of how people are what the Israelis did to Gaza. Listen, you saw that. You didn't see in 2014, I think it was, in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we were allowed to kill 16 casualties to 1 militant. That's Americans. You didn't see, have you seen with the Houthis, what's going on in Yemen, the mass starvation? Have you seen what's going on in Sudan? How about Nigeria? How about what Boko Haram is doing in Nigeria? Where is your outrage there?
Right.
There's a myth that says that I lived there, and I'm just trying to be consistent and fair. Your heart can break for the whole world, but you should take into account what was I going to say? The fundamental issue in the Arab world, when people think that Israel is the cause of all this strife. No, the Arabs have the Sunni Shia schism in the Middle East. They wouldn't need the Jews to be at each other's throat. Believe me, Iraq and Iran didn't need a Jewish influence to have a horrible war and kill each other. Shia, Sunni, you see this in the Gulf regions. You see that divide is very, very real.
I mean, some people are probably surprised the Taliban is getting ready to go to war with Pakistan. Why? Because there are tribal differences, there are differences over territory. So sometimes
human beings fight.
Yeah, this is absolutely.
Humans are going to be human.
Absolutely right. So, on the point I was going to make about film is that the successful film needs to put you on the scene, right? It's like if I were to tell you that I grew up in India. Now, you've lived in India, so you know, but most people would be like, well, what's that like? They wouldn't have a good sense of what it was. But if I show them a movie and I say, look, there's my house, and there I am at the age of 12, and that was what my street looked like, with the street vendors, and that's what I ate for breakfast, then you'd be like, oh, wow, and you get a little bit of a feel. And so in the film, I wanted to put you on the scene of October 7th. And then for skeptics who are like, I know about the Bible, it's just a bunch of made up stuff. I'm like, all right, well, you know what? Let's jump into the archaeological pit. We're going to look at some seals and some clay seals and some coins and some stone inscriptions. And you might still dispute the theology of the Bible. You may dispute the miracles, but I think I can convince you that the historicity of the Bible is being supported by a lot of modern-day archaeology. Yeah. And so I'm excited about the film because it covers territory I haven't covered before, and it's timelier now than when I made it.
I mean, look, when I read the Old Testament and Esau. Wait, it was I think it was Ishmael. Ishmael and his mother, they're dying of thirst. And his mother prays to God, and the God of Abraham sends her some bread, honey, and I think water, and saves her. And he says, don't worry, your son will go on to found a great people. But Abraham, the Arabs and the Jews come from the same father. They are brothers. They are stepbrothers. They're not stepbrothers, they're half-brothers, okay?
Right.
And that's in like one of the first stories of the patriarchs. It is the first story of the patriarch. I mean, so that is so fascinating to me, that this was written down 3,500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, whatever it was. And it was almost as though the fight was written in the book. It's almost like,
and not only that, I'll tell you something.
Like, what is going on? No wonder people who are not atheists are like, you guys are the ones that are causing all this. You write this shit in a book, and now everybody's like trying to fulfill this prophecy. Like, I get Hitch, but at the same time, I disagree with him for a lot.
Well, let me tell you something about Hitchens that ties into all this. So, Hitchens basically is like, Dinesh, you're an intelligent person. The stuff I'm sure you live your life, he says, by principles of reason and evidence, and you function that way in the world. You invest your money on that basis. If somebody told you your wife was cheating on you, you would demand evidence. And he goes, but somehow when it comes to religious belief in Christianity, you believe the most fantastic stuff without apparently any evidence. So I said to him, I said, all right, we'll get into that, Christopher, but now we're not on stage here. But I go, Christopher, the remarkable thing, not only about the Bible, but even Christian literature. If you take something like Pilgrim's Progress. In Pilgrim's Progress, you have this guy named Christian, and he runs into a guy named Evangelist. And Evangelist says to Christian, beware the wrath to come. And Christian goes, what wrath? And the evangelist goes, over there. Christian, the book says, Christian looks out. He thinks he sees something out there, but he's really not sure what it is. But he's convinced he does not want the wrath to come. He goes and starts packing. He's going to go basically in search of truth. Now, this is where the story really takes off, because his wife, his family, they're like, what are you doing? And the neighbors come in, and according to John Bunyan, they all basically start like beating on him and screaming at him, you're an idiot, you're a fool, how do you believe all this nonsense? And then according to John Bunyan, Christian takes his his index fingers of each hand, puts them in his ears, and runs into the street basically shouting, life, eternal life, right? Now, here's my point to Hitchens. The skepticism, the ridicule, all of this is total bullshit, it's right there in the narrative. In other words, it's not like John Bunyan doesn't know that there's a Christopher Hitchens. There's a little Christopher Hitchens living inside of John Bunyan.
Of course.
He totally gets it.
Doubt.
Every believer knows where Hitchens is coming from, right? But the power
you can't
of
have faith without doubt.
That's right. The power of it is that it is internal to the narrative. It's not like they have to look at some atheist coming in going, really? No, it is right there in the text itself. And the Bible is like that.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. My thing with Hitchens and people, new atheists like Sam Harris, who I have enormous respect for and like very much. I don't know him, but I've really given him a shake. I've listened to a lot of him and I've read his books. But my knock on all of them has always been that they assume we take religion as literally as they do. So they always look for these illogical contradictions in the Bible and stuff. Most of us are not reading faith that way.
Right.
It's about inspiration. It's about being able to extrapolate and imagine evil this way and versus the ultimate good this way. It's about the fact that we have, and we seem to have, a mind that wants to grasp and understand, what has the imagination and nostalgia for something like the ultimate good, something like truth. I think all of us are always moving in that direction. So all of us want to know what's really going on. That we're inherently philosophical creatures, but what's really going on? You're either going to be very religious about the fact that you can figure that out with math and logic, or you can at least know that you'll never reach it, but you can keep trying to perfect yourself internally, morally, and that would be sort of that would be the road to Jerusalem versus the road to Athens.
Yeah, I mean, my take on those guys, just very briefly, is that they are empiricists, right? So they are attentive to the world, but they don't see that empiricism itself raises questions which empiricism can't answer. So, here's a line from Immanuel Kant where he goes, two things strike me with awe. The first is the physical law, sort of out there, of the world. This is the organization of the world. The world is somehow conforming to mathematical laws. This is a kind of astounding fact, because there's no kind of reason it has to be that way. It could be another way. And then the other thing he says is, I also find something else, which is, even though I'm a grasping, surviving creature trying to adapt in the world, I have this like thunderous moral law inside of me, right? And so let's just dwell on those two things. What one philosopher called the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, which is the physical laws of the world. And the other is the peculiarity that we all have inside of us a moral source that somehow has unimpeachable authority. We never question its ultimate judgment. We may not do it, we may not follow it, but it's there, and it's unavoidable. And if you don't have it, you're like a psychopath, right? You're like a sociopath. So it is part of the definition of being human. And yet, if you were to ask, like a Sam Harris, give me a straightforward account of these two things, you'll notice that they will be very tongue-tied.
That's a really interesting, yeah, that's very, very interesting. Really interesting way to put it. Really interesting way to put it. I think Kant also said that we have a limited visual and auditory, we have a limited apparatus in which to perceive what's really going on as well.
Extremely profound idea, and I must say it's taken me years to fully grasp it. The reason I think it's such a powerful idea is, think about it. It is an idea that even though philosophy goes back to about 7 centuries before Christ, no one thought of that before Kant.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's
crazy. And it's crazy because it's not like E equals MC square. It is right in front of you, and it took the penetrating genius of Kant to realize that our limits to knowledge is not just what's out there. Our limits to knowledge comes from the inherently limited apparatus of perception that we bring to the world. And that is just a transformative idea.
I know, it really is. Well, and so it goes. I have not finished the film. I look forward to it. I literally was almost late coming here because I got so sucked into this whole idea.
Well, I take that as a compliment.
Yeah,
every filmmaker likes to hear this kind of thing.
Yeah, man, it's hard to make a film. It's hard to tell a story.
It's hard to keep attention for 90 minutes.
That's what I was going to say. It's hard to keep attention, but you do it, and it's scored great and everything else. I'm sure you're going to take plenty of flack for suggesting that the Palestinians are the dragons, and
well,
and I understand
they're being used by the dragon. It's not that they're, because yes, I mean,
they're being used.
They're being used.
Well, I would say a better way to say, the way I looked at your movie was, I don't like demonizing anybody, and I think there's some beautiful Palestinian and Arab people, of course, for them. That's been my experience, like I said. But for the most part, I take your film as saying, this is all played. This is all God's work. This is being played out on a cosmic level. There's nothing I can do. My friend who's a Muslim said, I don't know what to say about what's going on in Gaza. I said, you could say, sometimes I find myself falling to my knees and saying a prayer because I don't know what else to do. I think that's a perfectly appropriate reaction, at least for somebody on the outside looking in like myself.
It's the one part of the world that I think you need to understand with that element in there, the natural element abutted against the supernatural.
That's right. That's right. Well, I wish you the best, my friend. Thanks for making the time to come out here.
I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, man. We'll do it again. It's good stuff.
Love it.
All right, guys. We'll see you in a little bit. My special False Gods, speaking of which, False Gods just dropped last Wednesday on YouTube. Check it out. And I'll be at the Westminster House of Comedy in Vancouver, November, 13, 14, 15, and then November 20, 21, or 21, 22, I'll be at Plano, Texas, Mic Drop Comedy Club. So come get some, make you laugh. Thanks. Dinesh D'Souza, you're a man.
Enjoyed it.